For you to understand how I ended up cornered in a crumbling chapel, about to be killed by the descendants of a murderer, we have to go back a few weeks. Back to when I was just a normal guy with a stupid curiosity. A curiosity that started in a place where all stories begin and end. The past, my grandmother's attic. It had that smell all grandmother's attics have. A mixture of mothballs, the dust of decades, and the faint, sweet scent of old wood. I was there out of obligation, sorting what would be donated and what would be thrown away after she passed. It was a sad, mechanical job. Clothes she once wore, trinkets no one wanted anymore, photo albums with faces I barely recognized. And in the middle of that mountain of other people's memories, I found the box. It wasn't large. It was a metal box, heavy for its size, its edges corroded by a rust that formed maps of non-existent continents. There was no lock, just a tough latch that protested with a metallic groan when I forced it. Inside, the smell of old paper and oxidized metal. There were a few brass medals, a set of cufflinks that had lost their shine, things that seemed important to someone, someday. And at the bottom, under a scrap of frayed velvet, the source of my obsession, a photograph and a key. The photo was of a young woman, beautiful, with a look that was both shy and defiant. Dark hair, pinned up in a style I'd only seen in old movies. On the back, inelegant, slightly faded handwriting. Just one name, Legit. Next to the photo, a small bronze key with an ornamental design at its tip. A diary key. This wasn't my grandmother's. I knew it. I called my grandaunt, her sister, the family's official keeper of stories. When I mentioned the box, she went silent for a moment. A heavy, loaded silence. That box, she said, her voice low, belonged to your great-grandfather. Americo and the family ghost. The story no one ever told in full. All I knew was the skeleton of the tale. He had abandoned his wife and children, vanished into the world. The reason was always a blur. He was a tormented man, my great-aunt continued. He fled from a village in the countryside. A bad place, they said, cursed. He was never the same after that. He left everything behind, including that box. Your great-grandmother never touched it again. She said it had, the smell of that place on it. A bad place. Cursed her words. Instead of scaring me, lit something inside me. What could be so terrible that it would make a man erase his own existence? Who was Lydia? And what did that key open? The questions began to eat at me from the inside. I, who lived such a normal life. An apartment in the city, a job that didn't excite me, relationships that didn't last. I had no roots. And suddenly, there was one rotten root, perhaps. But it was mine. I had to pull it. I had to see what would come with it. The decision was made almost without me realizing it. I was going to that village. I was going to find what that key opened. The journey was like passing through a portal. The first few hours on the highway were normal. Cars, gas stations, the modern world. Then, the exit to the state road. Then the county road. And finally, the dirt road. With every mile, the asphalt gave way to red dust. The cell towers disappeared, and time itself seemed to move backward. The village's name appeared on a wooden sign, eaten away by time and rain. Almost illegible. Villa de Almas, Village of Souls. A name that at the time seemed poetic. Today, it sounds like a warning. The village was a skeleton. Houses from the early century, some still standing out of sheer stubbornness, others already surrendered to the wilderness. Cobblestone streets, where grass grew in the cracks. And the silence. A silence that wasn't peaceful. It was a heavy, waiting silence, as if the entire village was holding its breath. And the stairs, the few residents I saw, sitting on crooked porches, or walking slowly, didn't look at me with curiosity. They looked with a passive hostility, a cold assessment that told me, without words, that I did not belong, that I was a foreign body, an infectious agent. A woman, sitting on a rocking chair, stopped rocking and spat on the ground as I passed. A group of children playing with a makeshift ball stopped, the ball falling and rolling away, and they just stood there, staring at me with large, empty eyes. There was no inn, of course. My only option was the house that once belonged to my great-grandfather. It took me an hour to find it, set back from the center of the village, at the end of an alley. That dead-ended into an abandoned coffee plantation. The house was a shadow of what it must have once been. The wood of the walls was gray from the sun. The porch sagged dangerously. Broken windows looked like empty eye sockets. I forced the door, which opened with a groan of protest. The air inside was dense, still. It smelled of mildew, of rats, of time. Time, I discovered, has a smell. It's the smell of decay. Inside. Everything was covered in a shroud of dust. A table, a few overturned chairs, a wardrobe with its door open, empty. It was as if the inhabitants had left in a hurry, taking only what they could carry, leaving behind the ghosts of their objects. I settled in as best I could, clearing a corner to lay my sleeping bag, lighting a lantern I had brought with me. Night fell on the village of souls, not like a blanket, but like a shroud. And with it, the sounds began. The wind whistling through, the broken windows, the constant creaking of old wood. And something else. A cry. It started low, almost imperceptible. A woman's wail, distant, muffled. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, an animal, anything. But the sound had a cadence of pain, a melody of sorrow that was unmistakably human. It seemed to come from the walls, from the floorboards, from everywhere and nowhere. That was the first night. I barely slept. The crying only stopped when the first pale, weak rays of sun touched the window. The next day, driven by a mixture of fear and determination, I began my search. If there was a diary, where would it be? I looked in drawers, under the rotted mattress, in the wardrobe. Nothing. It was then that I noticed it. In the main bedroom, a floorboard. It was a slightly different color than the others, a shade less weathered by time. I forced it with my pocket knife. It gave way. And there, in the dark and dusty space beneath, was a book. A dark leather-bound book with a small, tarnished brass lock. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took out the key. The small, ornamental key. It fit. I turned it. There was a soft click. A tiny sound that echoed, like a gunshot, in the silence. I opened it. The handwriting was my great-grandfather's. The ink was faded, but legible. The first date, October 1935. The first sentence. The fever has come to the village. Not a fever you can cure with prayer. A fever of fear. I turned the pages, and the story began to unfold. The story the village wanted to keep buried. The story of Lydia. She was the daughter of a merchant, the jewel of the village. Promised in marriage to the son of Colonel Bestos, the man who owned everything around there. But Lydia, the diary told, was in love with someone else, a farmhand. From the colonel's own plantation, a young man named Bento. They met in secret, dreaming of running away. And then, the crime. My great-grandfather wrote with details that sent a chill down my spine. Lydia was found near the old chapel on the plantation. The brutality of the act shocked even those hardened people. The farmhand, of course, was the perfect culprit. He swore his innocence to the end. He was hunted down by the colonel's men and hanged in the village square, without a trial. Case closed. But my great-grandfather, he didn't believe it. It was while reading this part, sitting on the dusty floor, that I first smelled it. A smell, strong, unmistakable. The smell of expensive cigars and damp earth. I froze, because I had just read the sentence. The killer, he smelled of cigars and damp earth. I locked the door. I huddled in the corner of the room. The smell. It lingered for almost an hour. No, it wasn't in my head. That was a warning. The next day, I tried to talk to the villagers. I showed Lydia's photo. No one would speak. The only one who did was the village gravedigger. A strange old man, with one glass eye. Some people are better left buried, he told me. You have Americo's blood in you. The blood of a coward, or of someone who knew too much. I knew then. They weren't afraid of a ghost. They were afraid of me. The nightmare came that night. I wasn't sleeping. I was there. I saw what my great-grandfather saw. I was hiding, watching. I saw the colonel's son. He wasn't arguing with Lydia. He was smiling. He spoke of purification, of a ritual, and she fought back. She scratched his face. Hard. I woke up. With my arm burning. The same scratches. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. The house. The village. It was showing me, forcing me to see. I went back to the diary, my hands shaking. And there it was. The end of the story. My great-grandfather described how the colonel's son killed Lydia, and how, with the help of a henchman, he framed the innocent farmhand. He wrote, I saw the colonel's boy bury something under the altar of the old chapel. And on Lydia's grave, he drew a symbol in her blood. The symbol of our harvest. The harvest symbol. An eye inside a triangle with a stalk of wheat. I knew what I had to do. I ran to the cemetery. I found Lydia's grave. And there, scratched into the stone, was the symbol. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice behind me. It was the gravedigger. He wasn't alone. "It's the symbol of the family that runs this place," he said. "The family my grandfather served." My blood ran cold. "Your grandfather?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "The henchman. And my family has served the Bastos family ever since, making sure the secrets of the earth stay in the earth." I understood everything. The haunting wasn't Lydia. It was them. The hostility. The silence. It was a living conspiracy. They were the guardians of the crime. And I had just desecrated the tomb of their secret. To other men appeared, descendants of the Bastos family. I was surrounded. I discreetly turned on my phone's camera. If I was going to die, the world would know why. They took me to the old chapel, the place where it all began, and where, they made it clear, it would all end again. And that's when the camera fell. And that's when all hell, the real hell, broke loose. The diary. My great-grandfather wrote everything. About the ritual. About the proof you hid here, under the altar. My taunt, screamed with the last of my courage, was a mistake. Or maybe, my only salvation. The moment the words left my mouth, a freezing wind cut through the air inside the chapel, whistling through the cracks and extinguishing 2 of the 3 candles they had lit on the altar. The temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. And then, the crying, the same woman's cry I'd heard in the house. But now it wasn't an echo, not a memory. It was there, inside the chapel, coming from every corner and from nowhere. A lament of pain and of a fury that had been building for almost a century, that made even those hardened, cruel men shiver and look around. Panic replacing the arrogance. In their eyes, the gravedigger whispered her name, Lydia, like a cursed prayer. A plea for forgiveness that would never be granted. A clap of thunder exploded outside. So loud, the chapel floor shook as if struck by a fist, and the ceiling, the century-old wooden structure, rotten with rain and weary with time, began to groan, to crack, to moan. Beams the size of a man, dark and heavy, came loose, plummeting with a dull thud. The dust, the clay tiles, the plaster, saints with their serene smiles. Everything came down. Chaos. They forgot about me for a second, shouting, trying to shield themselves from the debris. And in that second, I saw my chance. I didn't think about the diary in my backpack. Didn't think about the proof under the altar. I thought about my camera, which had fallen to the floor, its small red light still blinking. I thought about my life. I grabbed the camera and I ran. I ran like I have never run in my life. With the sound of the chapel completely collapsing behind me, a sound of old, giant bones breaking, the final screams of the men muffled by wood and stone. I ran through the woods, branches and thorns tearing at my face and arms, but I felt no pain. I didn't look back. I knew that if I looked back, I would stop. I would become part of that land, another secret for the next generation of gravediggers. To bury, I reached the car, the engine never sounding so sweet. I started it with hands so shaky, I could barely turn the key in the ignition. I peeled out on the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of red dust, like a trail of blood. I drove without a destination, away from that epicenter of evil, away from the village of souls. Hours later, as the adrenaline began to subside, and the reality of what had happened started to hit me in waves of nausea and terror, and the sun began to set, staining the sky orange and purple, I stopped at the first roadside motel I saw, an anonymous, impersonal place, with neon lights that promised a kind of mundane safety. At least, that's what I thought. In the room, I locked the door, pushed the heavy dresser against it. I went to the bathroom and threw up. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, the scratched face, the wild eyes, the dirt, the dried blood. I was not the same person who had arrived in that village. I turned on my laptop. I watched the recording from the camera. It was all there. The chase in the cemetery, the arrogant, detailed confession from the Bastos and the gravedigger, the panic when the unexplainable happened, the collapse, the proof. I had the story. A story that needed to be told. I started editing, putting the pieces together, recording my narration. I worked through the night, non-stop, fueled by stale coffee from the hallway machine and a feverish fear. I owed it to my great-grandfather, Americo. I owed it to Lydia. I owed it to Bento, the innocent man who was sacrificed on the altar of impunity. When the video was finally ready, an hour long, the full story, I hesitated for a long moment before moving the cursor over the publish button. I knew that by doing this, I wasn't just telling a story. I was becoming part of it, forever. I would be telling the ghosts of that village, the living and the dead, that I was no longer afraid. But it was a lie. I was terrified. More terrified than ever. I drove for hours. I stopped at the first place I could find. I only had one thing to do. The world needed to know what happened in that village. What still happens. Because their evil can't be buried. ... It follows you. I clicked. The upload bar began to move slowly across the screen. Every percentage point was a drop of sweat running down my forehead, a beat of my heart against my ribs, and when it reached 100%, when the word published appeared on the screen in definitive green letters, I didn't feel relief. I felt a chill that wasn't from the air conditioning, a chill that came from the absolute certainty that by exposing their secret, by giving a voice to their victim, I had become the new target, the new ghost to be hunted. That's when I heard it. From the other side of my anonymous motel room door, hundreds of miles from the village of souls. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, loud. Bump, bump, bump. It wasn't room service. It wasn't a neighbor. It was the knock of someone who followed you, of someone who knows exactly where you are, and of someone who is in no hurry at all to come in.